Today, I'm going to talk about the impact of growing up with a narcissistic parent. Last time, I went over many signs that you might have grown up with a narcissistic parent. So if you missed that, click the link in the description. So now, let's talk about how having a narcissistic parent in our childhood impacts us as adults. The first impact that you might notice is you might notice that you find yourself generally terrified of making mistakes or of being judged. And this is again because in childhood, your parent likely withheld their love or punished you when you did something that they didn't like. So now, naturally, you have a deep fear of making those same mistakes, of getting punished, of having love removed in the same way. And in reality, all of us humans make mistakes. Mistakes are actually how we learn, how we grow. But with a narcissistic parent, we've actually ended up developing this shame response around natural mistakes. So we end up as an adult trying to avoid them at all cost. Second impact that you might notice in your adulthood is you might find yourself hyper-vigilant. Again, if in childhood you were regularly on the receiving end of maybe reactive rage cycles when your parent was upset, or when they were disappointed, or when they didn't like what you were doing. Or if not rage, you might have found yourself on the receiving end of the silent treatment, these moments of disconnection, again, in response to your actions. Now, your body will remember that emotional abandonment because in childhood, it was a direct threat to our survival. So now, as an adult, we end up being what's called hypervigilant. Always scanning, always looking, always worrying about someone or something outside of ourselves. And we do this as a way to protect ourselves, right? Asking, assessing, scanning, worrying about if others are upset, if they're mad at us, or becoming really scared and really worried when others are being quiet or are taking space, even if they aren't actually mad at us at all. Another impact that you might notice in adulthood is you might find yourself similar to hypervigilant. You might notice that you're what's called a people pleaser. You chronically are people pleasing. People pleasers really simply start out as parent pleasers. When your parent has unreasonable, unrealistic expectations in childhood that you always put their needs before their own, which is an unrealistic expectation for all of us as children, we end up growing up always trying, like we had to do in childhood, to please other people, to put their needs first while betraying our own needs. Another impact in adulthood that many of you might notice is you might find yourself struggling with boundaries. In childhood, your parent didn't allow you to have emotional boundaries. So you probably see yourself struggling with boundaries in your personal life, in your work life, in all of your relationships. Maybe you feel really guilty or like you've done something wrong if you have a boundary, if you're not there for people 24 hours a day, because you've never learned that not only is that unrealistic and impossible, that it's actually healthy to set limits, to set boundaries, to need time and to need space that those limits and boundaries will give you for yourself. Another impact that many of you might notice in adulthood is you might continue to deny your reality. If in childhood you regularly heard that you were too sensitive, you were too dramatic, things weren't happening as you thought they were, and no one was ever attuned to your emotions, you probably now struggle validating your own emotions, and you have a lot of self-doubt as a result. Always worrying about whether or not your feelings are valid. Are they rational? Are they appropriate? And then a lot of us end up having a difficulty making decisions. If we can't even validate our reality, how we're feeling, what we want, we're probably not going to make a choice in that direction to serve ourselves, to validate our reality. Final impact that some of you might notice in adulthood is you might have a history of toxic or dysfunctional relationships. For a lot of us of all kinds, from romantic relationships to family relationships to friendships. Because our first relationship with our parent figures, whoever that earliest caregiver was, sets the foundation for who it is that we will seek relationships with in adulthood. So if in childhood, in that first relationship, if we learned that it's normal, that it's to be expected, that we or our needs are disrespected, are invalidated, or that we're generally emotionally neglected, we will likely continue to accept that. We might even expect that within all of our relationships. Now, if these things sound like you, I want you to know that you are not alone. These habits that we carry into adulthood come from our earliest childhood conditioning, and while they are our current habits, they can be changed. You can heal. If you're noticing these in your current life or your current relationships, it actually doesn't mean you're broken at all. It actually means that you've adapted to your earliest environment and relationships, and now that you've noticed, you now have the opportunity to be a cycle breaker for yourself and for your family. And as always, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which one of these impacts do you notice most in your adult life? And are there any others that you are carrying with you? What is the impact of your narcissistic relationships now in adulthood? I'd love to hear it. Leave it in the comments below.